In the heart of Chicago, on a crisp October evening in 2024, the grand dining room of the Hartwell Mansion glowed under the weight of crystal chandeliers. The air was thick with the scent of expensive perfume and polished ambition. Emily Carter stood at the edge of the room, her plain gray dress falling just past her knees, unadorned, no hint of sparkle. Her hair was swept into a simple ponytail, her face bare of makeup, her only accessory a modest black clutch with no designer logo to boast. She wasn't here to impress. She never was. But as she stepped into the lion's den of Chicago's elite, every eye turned not with admiration, but with judgment. They sized up her dress, her flat shoes, the way she carried herself with quiet resolve. Emily felt the familiar sting of their stares, but she kept her chin high, her step steady, as if walking through a storm she'd weathered before. The Hartwell estate was a monument to wealth, its marble floors gleaming, its walls lined with art that cost more than most people's homes. The guests draped in couture gowns and tailored suits swirled around tables draped in pristine white linens, their laughter sharp and performative. Emily crossed the foyer, her clutch held close, when a woman in a sapphire blue gown blocked her path. This was Lauren Pierce, a socialite whose smile cut like glass, her diamond earrings catching the light as she tilted her head. "Oh, Emily, you made it," Lauren said, her voice loud enough to draw attention. "I almost missed you. You're practically part of the decor." The group around her snickered, their eyes darting between Lauren's smirk and Emily's plain attire. Lauren leaned closer, her perfume sharp and cloying. "Maybe next time borrow something from Catherine's wardrobe. You know, to look like you belong." Emily's fingers tightened on her clutch, but her face remained calm, her voice low and even. "I'm exactly where I need to be." Lauren's smile flickered, just for a moment, before she tossed her head and laughed, but the crowd's chuckles felt hollow, like they sensed something they couldn't quite grasp. The dining hall was a sea of power men in bespoke suits, women with necklaces that glittered like small galaxies, all circling tables set with gold-rimmed plates. Emily took her seat beside her husband, James Hartwell, who barely glanced her way. He fiddled with his cufflinks, his jaw tight, looking like he'd rather be anywhere else. At the head of the table sat Catherine Hartwell, James's mother, her auburn hair swept into an elegant updo, her crimson lipstick as sharp as her tongue. She was the kind of woman who could silence a room with a single glance. Across from Emily was Thomas Reed, the family's lawyer, his tie too tight, his smirk too practiced. Then there were the others, an aunt with a forced laugh, a cousin glued to his phone, a business associate whose Rolex screamed for attention. They all carried the same air, entitled, untouchable, certain of their place at the top. Catherine's voice sliced through the chatter first. "Emily, honestly, that dress. Did you dig it out of a clearance rack?" Her laugh was loud, almost theatrical, and the table followed her lead, heads turning, eyes gleaming with amusement. A woman in a shimmering gold gown leaned forward, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "Oh, darling, it's so charmingly simple. Did you sew it yourself?" The aunt, her diamond bracelet clinking as she reached for her wine, chimed in. "She must have married James for the money. I mean, look at her. What else could it be?" Laughter rippled again, sharper now, cutting deeper. Emily's fingers tightened around her napkin, but her face stayed serene. She looked at the aunt, her gaze steady, and said, "Is that what you think marriage is for?" The table went quiet for a heartbeat. Then Catherine waved it off, her laugh louder, as if to drown out the tension. During the first course, a man in a navy suit, a venture capitalist named Charles with a perpetual sneer, leaned across the table. His voice was loud, meant to carry. "Emily, tell me, do you even know what a private equity firm does, or do you just nod along when James talks business?" The table chuckled, a few guests exchanging knowing glances. Charles leaned back, swirling his wine, waiting for her to falter. Emily set her spoon down, her movements deliberate, and met his eyes. "I know enough to see your last deal fell apart," she said, her voice quiet but razor sharp. The room froze. Charles's face flushed, his sneer vanishing as a few gasps broke the silence. Emily took a sip of her soup, calm as ever, while the table shifted uncomfortably. Thomas Reed leaned back, his tone oily. If she really loved James, she'd have at least gotten him a proper anniversary gift. "What was it last year, Emily?" A journal? He smirked, and the table erupted again. James shifted in his seat, his face red, but he said nothing, offering only a weak smile, as if he were in on the joke. Emily's lips pressed together for a moment before she picked up her fork and took a slow bite of her salad. The mockery built like a wave. A cousin in a silk suit leaned over. You know, Emily, you don't have to try so hard to fit in. Just stay in your lane. The words landed like a slap, but Emily didn't flinch. She set her fork down, her movements precise, and looked at him. My lane, she asked, her voice soft but edged with steel. The table laughed, but it was nervous now, uneven. As the main course arrived, a woman named Victoria, a fashion critic with a pinched face and a silk scarf, leaned toward Emily. You know, dear, there's a thrift store I could recommend. They have dresses that might suit your budget. Her tone was all false kindness, but her eyes were cold, calculating. Emily paused, her knife hovering over her plate. She looked at Victoria, her expression unreadable, and said, I dress for myself, not your approval. Victoria's smile froze, her scarf suddenly looking too tight. The table's laughter faded, replaced by awkward coughs. Emily cut into her steak, her movements steady, as if she hadn't just shifted the room's energy. The dinner dragged on, each comment digging deeper. Catherine, raising her wine glass, said, Tell us, Emily, what does your family even do? Are they teachers? Shop clerks? The table roared. A man in a tailored blazer, another financier named Robert, added, She's probably never seen $1 million in her life. Emily's hand paused on her glass, her knuckles whitening for a split second. She looked at him, her gaze unwavering, and said, You'd be surprised. Robert laughed, but it was forced, and a few guests shifted in their seats. James, still silent, reached for his water, his hands trembling slightly. The room felt like a pressure cooker, the air thick with cruelty and something else no one could name. Halfway through dessert, a young reporter named Ethan, eager and overconfident, pushed a recorder toward Emily. Mrs. Hartwell, any comment on the rumors you're just a gold digger? His grin was smug, like he'd already written the headline. The table leaned in, waiting for her to crumble. Emily set her dessert spoon down, her eyes locking onto his. Write what you want, she said, her voice calm but edged with iron. The truth doesn't need my permission. Ethan blinked, his recorder lowering slightly. A few guests exchanged glances, their smirks fading. Emily took a sip of her coffee, her hands steady, while Ethan fumbled with his notes, suddenly unsure of his angle. Emily's phone sat on the table, its screen dark. She hadn't touched it all night, not even when it buzzed softly. But now, as Catherine launched into a story about the Hartwell family's latest triumph, a $2 billion merger that would reshape the market, she called it. Emily's fingers brushed the phone. She didn't pick it up, just let her hand rest there, like she was waiting for the perfect moment. Catherine noticed, her eyes narrowing. What's that, Emily? Checking your coupons. The table laughed again, but it felt rehearsed, like they were playing parts in a script they didn't fully understand. Emily smiled, just a faint curve of her lips, and said, $2 billion? That's intriguing. Her voice was calm, almost too calm, and it made the room pause. Catherine didn't like that pause. She leaned forward, her voice sharp. What would someone like you know about numbers like that? The table waited, expecting Emily to shrink. Instead, she looked at Catherine, her eyes clear, and said, More than you think. The laughter came again, loud and mocking, but it was different now. A few guests glanced at each other, uneasy. Thomas Reed coughed, adjusting his tie. The aunt rolled her eyes, muttering about delusions. But Emily just leaned back in her chair, her hands folded in her lap, like she was watching a movie she already knew the ending to. As the evening wore on, a board member named Richard, with a booming voice and a gold watch, stood to toast the Hartwell legacy. His speech dripped with swagger, praising Catherine's vision and James's future. Then he turned to Emily, his smile patronizing. And Emily, who? Well, keeps James company. The room burst into laughter, glasses clinking. Emily's face didn't change, but her fingers tapped once on the tableau's small, controlled movement. She stood, her chair barely making a sound, and raised her glass. To legacies, she said, her voice clear, and the people who actually build them. The room went quiet. Richard's smile slipped, and he sat down, his toast forgotten, as Emily lowered her glass without drinking. The conversation turned to the Hartwell Empire stock prices, boardroom deals, the kind of power that made people lean in. Catherine, in her element, asked, "So, Emily, how much wealth does your family really have?" The question was a trap, and everyone knew it. The guests laughed, some covering their mouths, others not bothering to hide it. James looked at his plate, his jaw tight, and muttered, "Maybe Mother's right." The betrayal hung heavy, cold as ice. Emily's eyes flickered to him for a moment before she looked away. Thomas Reed jumped in, his tone cutting. "Emily, you don't deserve to stand beside a Hartwell. You know that, don't you?" The room waited for her to break. Instead, she looked at him, her eyes like frost, and said nothing. In a quieter moment, as servers refilled glasses, a woman named Abigail, an art dealer with a sleek bob and a sharper tongue, leaned toward Emily. "You must feel so out of place here," she said, her voice low but loud enough for nearby guests to hear. "All this wealth, all this power, it's not for everyone." Her smile was thin, like she was doing Emily a favor. Emily turned her head slowly, meeting Abigail's gaze. "Funny," she said, her voice soft. "I feel right at home." Abigail's smile froze, her fingers tightening around her glass. The guests nearby faltered, their conversation stalling, as Emily turned back to her plate, her expression unyielding. The silence was louder than the laughter had been. Then Emily reached for her phone, her movement slow, deliberate. The room didn't notice at first, too busy chuckling, whispering, passing around another round of wine. But the large screen at the front of the room flickered. A message appeared, bold and unmistakable. "Emily Carter, CEO of Horizon Ventures." The laughter stopped, like someone had flipped a switch. Forks clinked against plates. A glass tipped over, spilling wine across the pristine tablecloth. Thomas Reed froze, his mouth half open. The reporters in the room, invited to cover the Hartwell's big night, scrambled for their phones, their cameras. Emily set her phone down and said, "This is just the start." Her voice was steady, like she was stating a simple fact. Catherine's face drained of color. "Impossible," she screamed, her voice cracking. "You're just a nobody." Thomas jumped in, his hands shaking as he pointed at the screen. "Those shares were bought for someone else. You're not the owner." An uncle, his face flushed from too much wine, added, "So what if you're a shareholder? You're still just a woman." The room laughed, but it was desperate now, like they were trying to claw back control. James stood, his chair scraping the floor. "I never needed your money," he said, his voice trembling. Emily didn't look at him. She just picked up her glass, took a sip, and set it down with a soft clink. A server dropped a tray, the crash echoing in the stunned silence. A woman named Olivia, a PR consultant with a polished smile, stood up. "Emily, dear, let's not overreact," she said, her voice smooth but frantic. "This is all a misunderstanding. We can work together." She gestured to the screen, as if she could wave it away. Emily tilted her head, her eyes narrowing. "Work together?" she asked, her tone so calm it sent a chill through the room. "I don't partner with people who don't see me." Olivia sat down, her smile crumbling, as the reporters scribbled furiously, capturing every word. The room was unraveling. Guests whispered, their voices sharp with panic. A woman in a velvet dress dropped her fork, her hands trembling. Emily's phone buzzed again, and she glanced at it, her face unreadable. She pressed a button, and the screen changed. Horizon Ventures has withdrawn its entire $2 billion investment from Hartwell Group. The words hit like a thunderbolt. The stock ticker on another screen plummeted, red numbers flashing like sirens. Guests gasped, some standing, others reaching for their phones. Catherine collapsed into her chair, her hands clutching the table. James stared, his face blank, like he couldn't process the collapse. Emily stood, smoothing her dress, and said, "I told you it was intriguing." In the chaos, a tech investor named Marcus, with a loud laugh and louder opinions, tried to regain control. He stood, raising his voice over the murmurs. "Come on, Emily, this is just theatrics. You don't have the nerve to tank a company like this." His laugh was forced, his eyes darting to the crashing stock ticker. Emily turned to him, her movement slow, deliberate. "Nerve?" she said, her voice cutting through the noise. "I built Horizon from nothing. What have you built lately? Marcus's face went slack, his laugh dying in his throat. The room watched, stunned, as Emily adjusted her clutch and stepped away from the table, her presence commanding every eye. The room erupted into chaos, people shouting, arguing, frantically making calls. Catherine's voice cut through, high and desperate. Emily, I'm sorry. Please, give this family another chance. Thomas was next, his face slick with sweat. We can renegotiate. We can fix this. James grabbed her hand, his grip too tight. I still love you. Don't leave me. A guest, some tech mogul with a fake tan, tried flattery. You've always had a place among us, Emily. She looked at them, her expression blank, like she was seeing them for the first time. She pulled her hand free, picked up her clutch, and started walking toward the door. The room watched, silent, as her heels clicked against the marble. As Emily reached the door, a corporate lawyer named Rachel, known for her ruthlessness, called out, You think you've won? This little stunt won't last. You'll be forgotten by next week. Her voice was venomous, her eyes flashing with defiance. Emily stopped, her hand on the doorframe. She turned slightly, just enough to meet Rachel's gaze. Forgotten, she said, her voice so quiet it forced the room to lean in. Check your portfolio tomorrow. Rachel's face paled, her bravado crumbling, as Emily walked out, leaving the threat hanging in the air like smoke. The news spread like wildfire. Phones buzzed, notifications pinged. A reporter shouted, It's on X. Hartwell Group is finished. The screen flashed a headline. The quiet wife destroys her husband's empire. Guests began to leave, their faces pale, their voices low. A woman in a fur coat whispered, She played us all. A banker with a grim expression muttered, This is a disaster. Emily kept walking, her shoulders straight, her pace steady. She didn't need to say anything. The truth was speaking for her. Outside, the Chicago night was cool, the air sharp against her skin. Emily stood on the steps, her breath visible in the chill. A beat-up sedan pulled up, nothing like the sleek limos parked nearby. She paused, her hand on the door, and glanced at a small photo tucked into her clutch, a faded picture of her mother, smiling in front of a modest house with a tiny garden. Emily's fingers lingered on the photo, her face softening for a moment. Then she closed the clutch, got into the car, and drove away. Back inside, the Hartwells were falling apart. Catherine was on the phone, screaming at someone, her voice hoarse. Thomas paced, his tie undone, muttering about lawsuits. James sat alone at the table, his head in his hands. The remaining guests whispered, their alliances shifting like sand. A young influencer with a massive following posted a video online, calling out Catherine's cruelty. It went viral in minutes, the comments flooding with support for Emily. The aunt, her bracelet now seeming garish, got a call her sponsor was pulling out. The cousin in the silk suit was trending on X for all the wrong reasons, his smug face plastered across the platform. Days later, Emily sat in a boardroom, her presence quiet but undeniable. A rival executive named Daniel, with a nervous habit of tapping his pen, hesitated before speaking. Ms. Carter, we underestimated you, he said, his voice low. The other executives nodded, their eyes avoiding hers. Emily leaned forward, her hands folded on the table. Most people do, she said, her tone matter of fact. She slid a contract across the table, her signature already on it. Daniel took it, his hands unsteady, and the room exhaled, like they'd been holding their breath. Emily didn't linger on the chaos she'd left behind. She was driving through Chicago, the city lights blurring past. Her phone buzzed, but she didn't check it. Instead, she pulled into a small diner, its neon sign flickering, its table sticky from years of use. She ordered a black coffee and sat by the window, watching the street. A man walked in, his suit expensive but understated, his face kind yet serious. He slid into the booth across from her, setting a folder on the table. You did it, he said, his voice low. This was Michael, CEO of a rival firm, who'd watched Emily's rise for years, not just as a business partner, but as something more. Horizon signed with us. Emily nodded, her fingers tracing the rim of her cup. Good, she said, and that was all. Michael reached across the table, his hand brushing hers. You didn't have to do it alone, he said. She looked at him, her eyes softening, but her voice was firm. I did, she said. But I'm not alone now. Michael smiled, a small, real smile, and the moment felt like a promise something solid in the midst of the storm. The next day, the news was everywhere. Hartwell Group was delisted, its stock worthless. Catherine's face was plastered across every outlet, her empire in ruins. Thomas was fired, his name blacklisted in every major firm. The aunt's social circle shrank by the hour. James was photographed leaving the mansion, his bags packed, his face hollow. Emily didn't watch the coverage. She was in a meeting, signing papers, her signature sharp and precise. The executives around her spoke respectfully, their eyes cautious. She didn't gloat. She just worked, her presence filling the room. Weeks later, at another event, the air was different. People whispered Emily's name, not with mockery, but with awe. She walked in, still in a simple dress, still without makeup, but no one laughed now. A reporter approached, hesitant, asking for a comment. Emily looked at her, her eyes calm, and said, "I don't have one." The reporter stepped back, as if she'd met someone untouchable. Michael was there, a few feet away, watching her with quiet pride. The room felt alive, electric, like everyone knew they were witnessing something extraordinary. But the Hartwells made one last desperate stand. At a final gathering to salvage their reputation, Catherine stood, her voice trembling. "You'll die alone, Emily. No one loves you." Thomas, his career in tatters, added, "They only follow you for your money." James, his eyes red, whispered, "You'll regret this." A fading socialite chimed in. "The cold CO will never be happy." The room went still, waiting for Emily to break. She didn't. She stood, her hands steady, her face unreadable. She looked at them one by one, then turned to leave. The silence was deafening. At the back of the room, Michael stepped forward. He didn't raise his voice or make a scene. He just took her hand and said, "We're not just partners. I want to build a real family with you." The reporters went wild, cameras flashing, phones recording. Emily didn't smile, but her eyes softened, and she squeezed his hand. The room erupted in applause, not for show, but for her, for the woman who'd walked through fire and emerged whole. Emily left with Michael, her steps steady, her head high. The Hartwells stood broken, their empire gone, their voices silenced. She didn't look back. She didn't need to. The truth had done its work, and she was free. So what do you think? Was Emily's takedown of the Hartwell empire a brilliant act of justice or a ruthless power play? Should she have given them a chance to redeem themselves? Or was there cruelty beyond forgiveness? And what about James? Did he deserve a second chance? Or was his betrayal too deep? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Hit that like button if Emily's story hit home, and subscribe to join me for more tales of heartbreak, betrayal, and triumph. Where are you watching from, and what's your take on this?